welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you were with me last week, we talked about the history of Tombstone and how it became one of the most haunted towns in America. If you missed it, I'll link it in the description box below. Today we'll be discussing Waverly Hills Sanatorium. But before we start talking about ghosts, let's go back to the beginning where it all began to try to get a better understanding on why it is considered extremely haunted. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Waverly Hills Sanatorium is in Louisville, Kentucky. It was originally a two-story building that began its construction in 1908 and opened for business on July 26th of 1910. The building was originally designed to accommodate 40 to 50 tuberculosis patients. At this time, tuberculosis was very serious and was spreading rapidly. People who were affected were isolated from the general public, were placed in an area at Waverly Hills Sanatorium where they could rest, stay calm, and have plenty of fresh air. These types of sanatoriums were placed on very high hills in a wooded area so that the people who were recovering would have a beautiful view. Unfortunately, with tuberculosis spreading like crazy, they had to turn their small two-story building into a much larger hospital. The construction to start growing the sanatorium started in March of 1924 and was finished and ready to open on October 17th of 1926. Now, what I thought was interesting was Waverly Hills was its own self-contained community. It had its own zip code, post office, water treatment facility, grew their own fruits and vegetables, and even raised their own meat for slaughter. All nurses and doctors, essentially every employee that came to Waverly Hills, had to say goodbye to everything they knew on the outside world. So once you went to Waverly, there was no leaving. The odd thing about that was the patients that were staying at the hospital, they were able to have visitors. They would have what's called a visiting day. Then once the visit was over, the loved ones were able to go back to the general public. Now, this massive building is still standing today. Now, this new hospital was able to accommodate 400 plus patients and had the most modern and well-equipped facilities for its time. Now, Waverly would end up closing down in 1961 after the discovery of the antibiotic would cure tuberculosis. Now, this building would end up reopening as Woodhaven Medical in 1962 and would eventually be closed by the state in 1981. Now that we've learned about the history of the building, let's kind of talk about what went on at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Before they found the cure for tuberculosis, treatments for the disease were very barbaric by today's standards. It could be as bad as the disease itself. The doctors would end up exposing patients' lungs to ultraviolet light to try to prevent bacteria from spreading. Now, this would be done in what is called the sunroom, and they would use artificial light in place of natural light. Now, since fresh air was a possible cure, they would have patients sit near open windows or on open porches no matter what season. So they would have patients even sitting outside in the dead of winter to breathe in the fresh air while also being covered in snow. Other treatments were much worse. They would surgically implant balloons in their lungs and fill it with air to expand the lungs and get more oxygen in them. But in order to do this procedure, they would have to end up removing muscles and ribs from their chest. Very sad. This would really be a last resort. If the patient was holding on by a thread, they would end up trying to do this procedure to save them. Now, patients who were blessed enough to survive this disease and its insane treatments were able to walk out the front door and go home. But those who were not so fortunate would end up leaving through what is known as the body chute. The tunnel for the dead, is what they would call it, was led from the hospital and to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill using a motorized cable system. The bodies would then be lowered in secret to the waiting trains. This was done in secret because they didn't want to freak out the patients who were there trying to recover. Surprisingly, back then, the doctors were worried about their mental health and did think that their mental health was just as important as their physical health. Based on death certificates, there were approximately 6,000 deaths dating back to 1911. Now let's kind of dive into Woodhaven. Now, Woodhaven would open, and there were rumors of mistreatment to their patients. Woodhaven was essentially known as an old age home, or as we would know it as a nursing home or retirement home. Due to budget cuts, it caused the residents to have horrible living conditions and patient mistreatments. Now the hospital is known to be one of the most haunted locations. Now, many people would end up purchasing it over the years. They would want to turn it into many different things, such as a prison or worship center. In 2001, the building had been abandoned and nature started to take over. Vandals would end up flocking to the sanatorium for a thrill. Homeless people would end up going there looking for shelter, and local teens would go to look for ghosts. The hospital would start getting its haunted house reputation when stories would start to circulate about a resident ghost being seen. There's a little girl that has been seen running up and down the 3rd floor. A little boy will be seen playing with a leather ball. A hearse would randomly appear in the back of the building, dropping off coffins, as well as a woman with bleeding wrists crying for help. Now, people who have visited Waverly would report the sounds of slamming doors, or when they walk by, they would say that they would see lights in the windows as if the electricity was on. Also, they would report hearing strange footsteps in rooms that are empty. There are stories of a man wearing a white coat who is known to be seen in the kitchen area. Others will go in there and they'll smell food cooking, but the kitchen is in such bad shape. There's no way anyone would be able to cook in there. In the cafeteria area, people will report hearing footsteps, swinging of doors, and the wonderful smell of fresh baked bread. Now, one of the most popular rooms at the sanatorium is room 502, and that's on the 5th floor. There are rumors of people hearing moving shapes in the windows and have heard disembodied voices. Now, supposedly, a nurse would be found dead in room 502 back in 1928. She was a 29-year-old who was pregnant and severely depressed. It's said that she committed suicide by hanging herself from the light fixture. No one knows how long it took until she was finally discovered. Another nurse was said to have worked in that same room and ended up jumping to her death from the roof patio. And no one knows why she would have jumped. Some people speculate that she could have even been pushed. However, these are just rumors. There's no proof that either of these events ever happened. But who knows? It could be true. Now, the legend of the 5th floor was said that this was where they kept the mentally ill patients. However, the patients on this floor were not insane. They were allowed to move freely and were not confined to just their rooms. So what exactly did happen in 502 that's causing people to have so many experiences? What do you think? Many reports that are happening right now are from many volunteers who work towards restoring Waverly Hills. Their experiences include hearing ghost sounds, lights appearing to be on when they aren't. They have had objects even thrown at them. Some were even struck by hands that they couldn't see and just went up and smacked them. They would also see apparitions in the doorways and halls. A lot of things happened at this hospital, good and bad. People were cured from tuberculosis, and then on the other hand, people were badly mistreated. So many different spirits could be haunting that place. I have no idea, but I really want to know your theories on room 502. Do you think those 2 stories of the nurses were true? Have you been there? Have you seen it? Have you experienced things firsthand? Let me know. I'm curious. I don't think I'd personally ever go because I'm too big of a scaredy cat. I can't do it. I'm sorry. You couldn't drag me to those places. Anyways, if you did like today's video, be sure to give me a like and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I upload every Wednesday about 10 a.m. Anyways, guys, you have a great rest of your week. See ya.